Hi, this is Dr. Balkan Devlen. I'm a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where I lead the Transatlantic program. Today, I am joined by Dr. Hanna Shelest, who is in Odessa and who is the Security Program Director for Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, and the editor of Ukrainian Analytica. Hanna, thanks for joining us today in these trying and difficult times to explain Canadians the ongoing Russian war of aggression in Ukraine. What's the situation and where we might be going from here?
Thank you for the invitation.
So let me just start by asking you, this is a very fluid situation. Things are moving quite fast. Give us a sense of the a SITREP, a situation report about what's going on right now, particularly maybe in and around Odessa, but more broadly in terms of the war, and just to have a sense of where we are standing.
The situation is changing each 30 minutes, so that's definitely the most unpredictable development of events. But the general situation is as following: the heaviest fightings are happening on the north of the country. We are talking about Chernihiv, Kyiv, Kharkiv, also on the border with a contact line between controlled and uncontrolled territories on the east. Where you go to the south, the heavy fighting's been happening around Mariupol on the Sea of Azov, and also near Kherson, because Kherson, that is the exit from Crimea to the mainland. When you speak about Odessa, comparing to what is happening there, the situation looks much safer. However, still we experience daily attempts of the airstrikes. Today, it was an attempt to reach the airport. We also had several attempts of the landing operations nearby. Several, let's say, the closest something like 20-30 kilometers from the city. We now have several Navy ships on the anchorage near our shore. We are speaking about 15 miles probably distance. So that all of these demonstrate the seriousness and the attempt to circle Ukraine as much as possible and to diversify our efforts, so the forces cannot concentrate on one direction. What is the significant development within the last 2 days? That predominantly civilian objects have been targeted by the Russian missiles. We have not only governmental buildings all around the country, but also we have hospitals being targeted, schools and railways, so all the civilian infrastructure. Plus, what is definitely quite a dangerous, the nuclear plants are under the threat now because Chernobyl is occupied, and two biggest nuclear energy plants near Zaporozhye and near Mykolaiv are currently expecting the fight because the fighting is happening just a few kilometers from them.
I think the picture you actually painted for us suggests I think two things. One, as you pointed out, the idea is to disperse Ukrainian forces so that make it harder for them to fight back because of the superior sort of the numbers that the Russians could bring the force. But the second one is that it also suggests a much bigger sort of political aim, a maximalist in a way, a political aim for Vladimir Putin when he commences this war of aggression. Could you sort of talk through what seems to be Putin's political aims, and what does he want to achieve for our listeners and viewers?
If to simplify, I would say that there are two goals: humiliation of Ukraine and restoration of the empire. And this empire can be called Russian Empire or the Soviet Empire. In his eyes, that is the same. He created some years ago to himself, and it's been even earlier than the attempted annexation of Crimea, the idea that the Soviet Union collapse being the biggest tragedy of the 20th century. He expected to restore the glory of the country as he imagined it to himself. And this glory for him would be impossible without the great history of the past. So in this way, he started the appropriation of the Ukrainian history and trying to present even the Second World War as it was only Russia, but not Ukraine, Belarus, and other Soviet republics fighting in it. But also he started to think that only by restoring his power at these territories, he will be able to make his own page in the history. But that is definitely the joke here, that instead of joining the history, he become a history. And that's the issue of what is happening now. That is where his rhetoric is. You can follow his speeches within the last few weeks, all of them been referring to history. There were plenty of misinformation, disinformation, the open lies over there, but he's trying to base all his arguments on history. That's something that he became even obsessed. But also in all these speeches, what we noticed, even before he spoke about Ukrainians, usually in the very negative meaning, as something like a small brotherly, ununderstandable. He didn't care that historically it is Moscow who is the small brother of Kiev, not opposite. But still, it was something of this deminimizing, probably, efforts. And as for now, it was really interesting for me. A few of my colleagues, Afro-American colleagues from the US, they started tweeting like, we felt the huge racism in his statements. How he described Ukraine and Ukrainians, we felt the parallels with the racism against the African-American community, and they were shocked by themselves. We even didn't think it like this. But these people care about this thing. They understand what they're talking about. And that was quite an interesting discovery for us, that really, when you want brotherhood, you're not speaking in such denominations about another nation.
I mean, it's clear that his chauvinism, in that sense, increased and intensified over the years. It's something I think you highlighted and have been following quite closely, but particularly in the past few years. His obsession with his place in history, that we know he has been asking around the historians how the history will write about me, and is increasingly erratic and unhinged speeches. One of the shocking things or surprising things for me is how his statements became almost unhinged across time. Putin was sort of famous for being completely in control of his emotions, and his latest speeches as a ranting madman almost is quite worrying, and of course also suggests a very distorted worldview. It looks like the initial operation, the purpose was first that Putin was extremely optimistic about the chances. And then he really misread the Ukrainians. I think he actually seems like he really thought that the Russian invading forces will be greeted as liberators, and he will just march to Kiev, and people will just lay down their arms, and Zelensky would flee. And just to note here, whatever you feel and think about Zelensky before, I think it's very clear right now that he proved himself to be someone of character and really get into the war hero, at least in the Western perception, that's for sure. So his perception of Ukraine and how the war could go was very, very distorted. But the realities on the ground and how fiercely Ukraine is resisting, did this alter his vision? In other words, would Ukrainian resistance in Kiev, in Kharkiv, in other places, and his inability to push through in a blitzkrieg style to Kiev and sort of impose a regime change, when that seems to be failing, would that make him stop and think, or would that make him double down and, as we see in the past couple of days, increasing the targeting civilian areas and basically sort of reverting to a playbook from Chechnya, Grozny, and Syria, and increasing the shelling and basically doubling down rather than stopping and looking for an exit?
That is absolutely true that Mr. Putin and his inner circle underestimated Ukrainians. We expected it earlier from his statements. He said that Ukrainians will be happy to greet Russians, and that the information he spread in Russian media and social networks, that Ukrainians should greet Russians with flowers. That's why a lot of soldiers joined. And then they realized, and now they're calling to their families and saying, oh, Ukrainians were not waiting for us. We've been betrayed by our commanders. That's all recorded by our security services for videos, for their testimonies. And these Ukrainian unity, that is probably what Ukrainians became surprised by themselves. We definitely had this feeling of unity after Euromaidan and all other events in the country, but probably not in the same scope as we have now. That is tremendous. But at the same time, what we hear after 7 days of war, that they're still spreading the information that Ukrainians are going to surrender, that if the city is Russian speaking, so the city should be welcoming the Russian forces. And that's really funny, because even the mayors that's previously been seen as not pro-European, they are definitely seen now as very pro-Ukrainian. And we know how they're building the defense of the towns and how they're trying to protect, and all the jokes happening around the country. So people definitely became the biggest surprise of Mr. Putin. His reaction to this, it seems to me that he became furious. And in general, he's becoming furious when something is going not as he planned. But here, the whole campaign being based on the idea that Ukrainians would surrender. And we even know the facts that they've expected 48 hours. Because at one of their biggest media websites, the article being automatically published with the information that Ukraine surrendered. It looks like somebody pre-scheduled it, and it appeared and nobody noticed it immediately. So we have this print screen with this information. And definitely 2 days or 7 days, you already feel how everything is going on. So now, because of this, we have these crazy statements about nuclear weapons readiness. And you understand that that is the statements that we probably didn't heard, at least from 1980s, from the latest crisis, or maybe even from 1960s when the Cuban crisis happened. So that's demonstrate that he doesn't have limits, that he became obsessed, and because of this, you definitely don't know how the events would continue.
One point that you have raised, and I think it's increasingly becoming clear, despite all the censorship and despite the Russian state's attempts to control all the information environment in Russia, it starts, I think, trickling down to the Russian public. We saw with the protests across Russian cities against the war, and we saw, with particularly the young soldiers and others not knowing that this was the mission, and not willing to fight, and even sometimes occasionally engaging in self-sabotage and stuff like that. There seems to be, if he doubles down and continues to target civilians, there seems to be an upswell of or there might be an upswell of opposition from the Russian public as well. Would that have an impact on Putin's calculus, as well as the very tight targeting of oligarchs? Not all of them are targeted yet, and I think there's still people like Abramovich and others need to be targeted in a much more serious ways and aggressive ways. But do we see elite discontent around, as well as increasing public discontent of this war of aggression, and how Russian people are reacting to it? Would that force one way or another either to Putin stop, or in a very Soviet way, he suddenly needs the surgery and never gets out of the surgery kind of structure?
The elite behaves the same as the general population, so we cannot separate them from the general public. And the idea is that the Russian society currently is very divided. We have some group of those who started to speak against the war. What is interesting that just few of them are speaking that Russia is an aggressor and really what is happening. Many of those who are speaking against the war, they are just thinking that that is the US who initiated the war and Russians and Ukrainians don't want it. So let's make peace, no war, but without those who are guilty. But at least they accept that war is unacceptable and that is bad. People are afraid. There are quite a number of people, the big percentage, were just afraid to go on the streets or protest, because previously they'd been, even for the single protest, people were beaten and arrested, and for like at Facebook, you can be arrested. All these cases people remember. So it is the extreme fear of the state law enforcement agencies. But unfortunately, we also should be clear that it is quite a number of population who support this war. And we see it from the social networks, we see it from the statements of journalists. For example, yesterday we were really shocked when several hundreds of the writers and poets signed an open letter in support of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. It was published in the literature newspaper. It's called Literatурная газета. It's very, very famous from the Soviet Union. At that time, it was seen the most liberal, probably the fresh air. And you need to understand that among those who signed were even members of the PEN Club. For those who don't know what that is, PEN Club, it is the World Organization uniting poets, journalists, with the idea of freedom of the words, with supporting oppression and everything. So they have a very strong human rights components there. It's not just the cultural institution. So members of this PEN Club signed this letter in support of the war. That demonstrates that, unfortunately, we can't say that there is only one Mr. Putin who is crazy, and as soon as he is getting out, the situation can improve. Unfortunately, there is a population that's supporting. But deaths of the Russian soldiers, when they are becoming public, we hope that they can change the situation. As for now, Russia is hiding these numbers. They even don't want to take the corpse of the dead soldiers back to the Russian Federation. They already organized the crematoriums just at the Belarusian border, so not to return back these corpses. So Ukrainian government created a special group at Instagram calling like, you're looking for yours, something like this. It is more than 500,000 subscribers already to this group. So you can imagine what is the interest and how many people are searching for their relatives.
I mean, I think it's in one sense it's depressing, but it's also in another sense that there seems to be mechanisms in which this, eventually, unfortunately, with a lot of human loss of life, would put pressure. I immediately remember about Afghanistan and the what was it called, the Mothers of Soldiers committees and protesting against that during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and when those soldiers are not coming back. But I think that's a very long and bloody road to go, unfortunately. So let me just pivot to a question, and I'm mindful of your time, about the Western response and what how do you see it, and what more Canada, particularly, but the West more broadly, can do. One thing that really sort of surprised me is in a sort of dark, ironic way, Putin seem to be not only sort of the patron saint of Ukrainian national unity, as you pointed out, we're combining, really uniting Ukrainians against the invaders, but also the guy who initiated the European sort of rearmament and German return to a proper defense policy. In that sense, although it's still not enough, it was surprising to see relative unity after dithering a little bit, coming from particularly the Europeans. So let me give me a sense of what's your assessment of Western response so far, and what would you like to see more that the West, Europeans, Americans, and Canadians can do to support Ukraine in its fight against the invaders.
Some of the experts are saying that what Ukraine is receiving, despite the huge numbers of support that we are receiving, but it is too late. Because if to be honest, only United Kingdom, Lithuania, and the United States sent the necessary weapons in advance. That is like javelins or the NLAW, that anti-tanks rifles that are very important for Ukraine. Turkish Bayraktars are really important now, and people are joking that we have sent javelin and life-giving Bayraktars. So making these analogs to the sent persons, but with all these jokes, that definitely demonstrate the power of these weapons and how they're important for defense of Ukraine now. Some of the other states starting sending, but that is quite a problems with delivery. You understand that when you were able to send their airplanes just to Kiev, that is one. Now what they can is sending something to the border between Poland and Ukraine, and then it is 800 kilometers that we need to pass by land, and passing by land meaning that you are under the threat. So that is the very serious risk with delivering. But a lot of countries are delivering humanitarian aid as well, both in money and in fuel and some other stuff. What Ukraine needs now, we definitely need more weapons. We are talking about anti-aircraft, so air defense systems, and we need the anti-tank systems, because that is the primarily weapons that Russians are using as for now. We need fuel, because we have sufficient of the tanks and aircrafts maybe now, but fuel is something what you need constantly. And most of the fuel that we've been receiving before, we were exporting it. Ukraine is not producer of all this. Then Ukraine definitely would like to have more airplanes, because our air defense forces were not the most developed later. I mean, that's expensive and that's what we need. But here it is limited to some countries, because you can't give immediately all types. You need to know how to use them. That is not a rifle. That's why we're expecting those countries who still have MiG and Su, many of them are NATO member states, still have them from Soviet times, to help us with them. Also, we are speaking about political support. We need support within the international organizations. We need lawyers, by the way. Ukraine really need the support of the international lawyers, because we are now documenting the war crimes, the crimes against humanity, or everything that is happening, and support later in the international courts. The International Court of Justice starts their case on the 7th of March. That's important, because that's, you understand, lawyers are expensive, good lawyers are even more expensive. That is a huge work that should be done, and Ukraine doesn't have sufficient number of these, because it was not an issue for us. Then we can speak about in the future monies for the reconstruction, because Russians destroyed a lot, and we would need huge money just for the reconstruction of roads, bridges, and all other things. So the international community already can start gathering the rescue and restoration fund. And the last but not the least, what Ukraine is insisting, we need a no-fly zone. That's not something that Canada probably can provide. It's too far. But still, the problem is that no-fly zone is not just because we are dreamers, but think about the collateral damage from the cruise missile, if this collateral damage is the nuclear facility. So that is in the interest not only of Ukraine, but definitely in the interest of all other countries, because you can remember Chernobyl and their consequences.
I mean, I think you're suggesting very concrete things. Particularly, just want to sort of reiterate the lawyer component. I think Canada is one of the sort of ones who initiated the ICJ proceedings. I think with regards to crimes against humanity and war crimes being sort of committed right now. So that's I think a clear. In a very concrete sense, something Canada can do and Canadian lawyers can do. So for those who are watching and listening to us, who are in this particular field, I think that's something that can definitely be pushed forward. One component with regards to the no-fly zone, I mean, one of the pushbacks is that this of course, this needs to be done by the United States. To be frank, if it is done, no other really country will have the necessary capabilities, both in terms of air defenses as well as the ability to patrol the skies. And US is very clear that they will not be sort of engaged militarily in the region. And one of the pushbacks with regards to the no-fly zone has been that this risk escalation of war between Russia and NATO, because you would end up needing to shooting down those planes as well as their defenses in Russia, and then you could go to a much wider war. That seems to be and that I think there are sort of some credible arguments there. What I'm trying to understand is what could be a mechanism in which that not necessarily lead to a potential escalation, but also provide a support or a safe haven in one sense for the civilians, because I don't think there are necessarily those two stark choices with nothing provided as well as a complete cover in which you are going into war. What could that in between thing that is carved out could look like?
That is impossible to imagine without Russian forces getting out. That's just technically unacceptable and would not be possible. Ukraine would definitely not surrender. That's already understandable from the moods. The situation as for now is that it looks like Ukraine would not agree to become neutral state. And it's not because we are very stubborn, but because we've been neutral in 2014 and Russia occupied Crimea, so it didn't prevent Russia from the actions. And now we understand that there will be just no sense in doing it. It looks for me that the real in-between scenario can be only when the opposition would rise inside of Russia, when the oligarchs, when the people from the security service would understand what damage it is done for the Russian Federation. And here I hope, for example, for the intelligence community, because we saw the reaction of Mr. Naryshkin, the head of the foreign intelligence, that he was completely uncomfortable at that meeting of the National Security Council of the Russian Federation. So it seems to me that the changes can happen only from inside of the Russian Federation. That is the most difficult, that is the most problematic, but still, even with all the sanctions, Mr. Putin has nothing to lose, because it is not his personal money he is losing, or he doesn't care about this money that much. He hidden them in different offshores, and that's quite a well known, and it's more difficult to go for this personal money. He wants history, he doesn't want money. That's why without the strong opposition inside of the country, I don't see any type of the middle way.
No, I mean, I completely agree there. I think there's one way out of this, and that's, without contemplating the end of Putin, I don't really see how we could actually bring this to an end. And we should really be not really shy about thinking about a post-Putin Russia and how we could help to bring that about, and what will be the mechanisms to do that. I totally agree. With Putin in power, this war of aggression will continue. My question was about the no-fly zone in betweenness. So basically, is there a thing that could be carved out without somewhere between nothing being provided on the one hand, and a complete no-fly zone over all of Ukraine on the other hand? Is there a sort of something in between that can be done that protects the civilians, but not necessarily increase the risk of escalation between a war between Russia and NATO significantly? There will be some escalation. But is there a formula? I'm not a military expert, so I don't know whether that would be feasible. But one of the pushbacks, like I said, is that if we do this, we are at war with Russia for the United States, and there has to be one way to carve this out in such that we are providing some protection to the civilians while not necessarily risking a broader war with Russia. Can you see anything between that?
As for now, we are definitely speaking about the no-fly zone at least under the nuclear facilities, because we are talking about the nuclear plants that Ukraine has at our territory, and now fightings are happening near two of them in Mykolaiv and Zaporizhia. So that's something limited, but that is really important. The second is it can be the ships, the Navy ships in the Black Sea region that would patrol and would not allow the landing operations, because you can do it in the neutral waters or in Ukrainian territorial waters, but not coming to the ground, but preventing the Russians from crossing the line. That may help, because in this way you will secure the south. You'll secure the regions on the south that are very important, but not making any provocations. That's for sure. And as additional support to Ukraine, because you understand that you can give what Ukraine need, and Ukrainian soldiers will do it by themselves. So in this way, all this equipment and ammunition that Ukraine is asking, that's definitely important. And first of all, it is protecting people, because each missile that is counter-targeted with the proper air defense ammunition, that is saved lives. That is the saved lives of people on the ground.
No, I mean, I think these are, like I said, great, very concrete suggestions, particularly with regards to the arguments about over nuclear power plants, which has, like we pointed out, has a much broader, validity for everyone involved. This is, not really limited to Ukraine. So there's a real case over there, as well as the blockading of ships. I think that we do have examples of that done before. That could significantly limit and complicate Russians' invasion plans. And the third one, of course, is that in a similar way that has been done in the Second World War, we could have volunteer pilots coming from other countries, and planes, like you pointed out, probably Russian-made planes, because the other ones will be too complicated with technically and trainings and stuff. But donating those planes, giving those planes, and having like the Czech and Polish fighter pilots that fought for the Battle of Britain. I think there is a group of who will be willing, to go to Ukraine and volunteers to man those planes. And I think there is one way to provide, at least try to level the field when it comes to air superiority with Ukraine, without necessarily officially involving or legally involving NATO. And so I think we need to really think creatively, and we need to be aware that I think the fear mongering that Vladimir Putin tries to engage in by scaring us with the nuclear threats is also a psychological tactic. That as much as the West doesn't want a nuclear escalation, so does the Russians. So just because he's making a lot of noise doesn't mean that he is going to go up to that level very quickly. So we need to, in that sense, not to be scared off from providing more support and standing up firmer. Yes, there is risk of escalation, but that risk can be managed, and there are multiple ways in which that can be done. So we need to really be more creative in how we can provide that support and push back without increasing the risk of a nuclear escalation significantly. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that kind of creative thinking in the West yet, and hopefully that will get there. Hanna, is there any last points that you would like to make before I let you go?
No, because the situation is definitely changing so quickly. So I just hope that over this summer, many of you will be able to travel to Ukraine and to see the beauty of this country, and to see much better news about it, about development, about investments, about the free trade or visa-free agreements between Ukraine and Canada. And we will be able to speak about the positive developments in the foreign policy and international relations, rather than the war that nobody could expect just in the middle of Europe. Exactly,
and we all, wish you the success and the victory in this war of aggression. And please do stay safe. And thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for the invitation.